I'm Catherine Wilson, 28, and the day I graduated high school was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life. Instead, my parents' words shattered everything. "We're not taking photos with the ugly graduate." They were embarrassed of my appearance, my acne scars, my braces, my slightly overweight figure. That night, after the ceremony, they told me I had 2 weeks to move out. Their perfect family image couldn't include me. They literally disowned their own daughter over looks. 10 years later, I'm standing in front of their door again, holding something they desperately need. Before I dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Family drama like this happens everywhere, doesn't it? If you've ever felt judged by the people who should love you most, hit that like button and subscribe to see how karma eventually caught up with my image-obsessed family. Trust me, this family revenge story has an ending you won't see coming. Growing up in the Wilson household meant one thing above all else. Appearances mattered. My mother, Diane Wilson, had been Miss Connecticut 1990 before marrying my father, Richard Wilson, a successful investment banker who had quite openly married up in the looks department. From my earliest memories, our family dynamic revolved around how we looked to others. I was born first, and for a brief period, I was the apple of my parents' eyes. That changed when my sister Emma arrived 3 years later. While I had inherited my father's broader frame and stronger features, Emma was blessed with my mother's delicate bone structure, naturally blonde hair, and effortless poise. The shift in attention was subtle at first, but by elementary school, it was undeniable. "Catherine, stop slouching. No one will ever want to date you if you stand like that," my mother would say, adjusting my posture at family gatherings, while cooing over how adorable Emma looked in her new dress. My father wasn't any better. When I brought home straight A's, his response was typically, "Good. You'll need to rely on your brains since you didn't get your mother's looks." Our family photos told the story clearly. Emma would be positioned front and center, with professional lighting that made her glow. I was always positioned slightly behind, often angled to minimize my appearance, sometimes even cropped partially out of the final versions that made it to our family's social media accounts or the Christmas cards sent to hundreds of country club acquaintances. My childhood bedroom walls showcased Emma's beauty pageant trophies and modeling certificates that had accidentally been placed there because Emma's room was getting too crowded with achievements. My academic awards and writing competition certificates remained in a box under my bed. "It's just how genetics works, sweetie," my mother said once when I was 13, and crying after overhearing her tell her friend Stephanie that Emma got all the good genes. She patted my shoulder. "Some people win the lottery, others need to work harder. That's why your father and I are pushing you academically. We're being realistic about your prospects." By the time I reached high school, I had internalized that I was the family disappointment. While Emma was dating the football quarterback and being nominated for prom queen as a sophomore, I retreated into academics and a small circle of equally academically focused friends. My weight fluctuated as I tried diet after diet, suggested by my mother, but nothing satisfied her. The braces I needed because of dental issues became another mark against me in my parents' eyes. "Do you have to smile so widely in public?" my father asked. After a school concert, where I had a small solo. "Those metal braces catch the light in the worst way." What hurt most was how conditional their love felt. When Emma got a C in algebra, my parents hired a tutor and reassured her that math isn't for everyone, sweetie. When I struggled in PE due to asthma, I was told I was embarrassing the family with my lack of athletic ability. The worst part was that I still desperately wanted their approval. I pushed myself to graduate as valedictorian, hoping that academic success would finally make them proud. I rehearsed my graduation speech for weeks, imagining that this achievement would finally earn their genuine smiles and congratulations. The morning of graduation, my mother looked at the acne breakout I had developed from stress and sighed deeply. "Well, at least you'll be on stage far enough away that most people won't notice how bad your skin looks." When I stepped down from the podium after delivering my speech, the principal whispered, "Your parents must be so proud." I smiled and nodded, the lie easier than explaining the truth. But deep down, I held on to hope. Surely today, after hearing me speak about perseverance and seeing me receive the highest academic honors, they would finally see my worth. The graduation ceremony took place on a perfect June afternoon. As I sat on stage with the other honor students, I could see my parents and Emma in the fifth row. They looked picture perfect as always. My father in his tailored navy suit, my mother in a cream designer dress that probably cost more than most families spent on a month's rent, and Emma in a complimentary pale blue sundress that made her look like she had stepped out of a catalog. After receiving my diploma and honors cords, I made my way through the crowd to find them. Several of my teachers stopped me to offer congratulations. Dr. Reynolds, my AP literature teacher, hugged me and said, "You're going to do amazing things, Catherine. Remember that." I finally reached my family, breathless with excitement and hope. "There she is, our valedictorian," my father said. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Can we take a family photo?" I asked, spotting one of Emma's friends nearby with a camera. My mother looked at my father, then back at me. "Catherine," she said quietly, "we're not taking photos with the ugly graduate. Your face is broken out. Your hair looks greasy, even though I told you to wash it this morning. And that gown makes you look even heavier than usual. We'll just use Emma's graduation next year for the family albums." The words hit me like physical blows. Even though I'd heard variations of this sentiment my entire life, something about this moment, when I should have been celebrating my greatest achievement, broke something inside me. "Mom, that's so mean," Emma whispered, looking uncomfortable. "It's honest," my father replied. "Catherine needs to face reality. The academic achievement is fine, but we have standards as a family." I stood there, honors cords around my neck, diploma in hand, fighting back tears, as families all around us took joyful photos with their graduates. "Let's go to dinner," my mother said finally. "Your grandmother is waiting at the restaurant." The dinner was excruciating. My grandmother Barbara, my father's mother, was the only one who seemed genuinely proud of me. She gave me a card with a modest check inside and whispered, "You've always been my brilliant girl." But my parents spent most of the dinner discussing Emma's upcoming modeling competition and my father's recent golf tournament win. My valedictorian speech received a passing mention, with my father noting, "At least she didn't embarrass us up there." When we arrived home, I went straight to my room, emotionally exhausted. But 10 minutes later, my parents knocked on my door. "We need to discuss your future," my father said, standing stiffly in my doorway while my mother looked around my room with visible distaste. "I got a full scholarship to State University," I reminded them. "Classes start in September." "Yes, well," my mother said, "your father and I have been talking. We think it's time for you to become independent. You're 18 now, legally an adult." My father cleared his throat. "You have 2 weeks to find your own place and move out. We'll be converting this room into a home gym." I stared at them, not comprehending at first. "You're kicking me out? Right after graduation?" "Don't be dramatic, Catherine. We're simply accelerating your adulthood," my mother replied. "Emma needs to focus on her career without distractions. And frankly, having you around doesn't fit with the family image we're cultivating." "Family image?" I echoed, my voice rising. "I'm your daughter, and you've been a disappointment in many ways," my father said bluntly. "We've provided for you for 18 years. Your scholarship covers tuition, and you can get a job for living expenses. Consider this our graduation gift to you, independence." They left without another word, closing my door behind them. I sat on my bed in my graduation dress, honor cords still hanging around my neck, and sobbed silently into my pillow. The next morning, Emma slipped into my room while our parents were at their country club brunch. "Kat, I'm so sorry," she said, sitting beside me. "I tried to talk to them, but they won't listen." "Will you visit me?" I asked her, already knowing the answer from her expression. "I want to, but you know how they are. They're talking about additional modeling opportunities for me, and," she trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. "It's okay," I lied. I understand. Within a week, I had found a tiny studio apartment near the community college, where I'd take summer classes before transferring to State University in the fall. I used my savings from tutoring jobs to pay the security deposit and first month's rent. My grandmother Barbara slipped me an additional check when she came to say goodbye, but even she was careful not to openly defy my parents. "They'll come around, dear," she said unconvincingly as she hugged me. "Just focus on your studies." The following weeks were a blur of loneliness and adjustment. I moved my few belongings into the apartment, which was barely 300 square feet with a kitchenette and bathroom, so small I could touch both walls with my outstretched arms. The mattress on the floor, the single plate and cup, the folding table that served as my desk, everything emphasized how completely I'd been cast out. The first night alone, I scrolled through social media to see my parents had posted family photos at a restaurant. "Celebrating new beginnings," the caption read. I was nowhere to be seen or mentioned. When a distant cousin commented asking about me, my mother replied, "Catherine is pursuing her own path now." Depression hit me hard. I attended my summer classes mechanically, then returned to my empty apartment. I stopped checking social media after seeing photos of my family vacationing in the Hamptons. All smiles without me. I had been erased, not just from their home but from their narrative. 3 months into my exile, I received an email from my father. My heart leapt thinking they had reconsidered, but the message was brief and businesslike. "We're closing your childhood bank account. Any remaining funds have been transferred to Emma's college fund as she'll be attending private university next year, rather than relying on scholarships." The message was clear. I was no longer part of the family. I deleted the email and cried myself to sleep. My salvation came in the form of Mrs. Larson, my elderly neighbor who noticed I never had visitors. She invited me for dinner, and something about her kind, no-nonsense approach broke through my walls. When she learned my situation, she connected me with her daughter, a therapist who agreed to see me at a reduced rate. "What your parents did isn't normal or healthy," Dr. Larson told me in our first session. "It's emotional abuse, Catherine. And it didn't start at graduation. It's been your entire life." That first year on my own was about survival. I worked part-time jobs, maintained my scholarship, and slowly began rebuilding my sense of self-worth. I spent holidays with Mrs. Larson rather than alone, though each celebration was tinged with the pain of family rejection. When my grandmother Barbara died, suddenly 8 months after my graduation, I learned about it through an obituary online. I attended the funeral, standing at the back, and left before the family gathering. My parents saw me but made no acknowledgement. Emma sent a text later. "Sorry about Grandma. Hope you're okay." It was the last contact we had for years. My second year on my own marked the beginning of real change. I transferred to State University's main campus, 2 hours away from my hometown, and embraced the anonymity of being just another student among thousands. Nobody there knew me as the ugly Wilson girl or Emma's unfortunate sister. I was just Catherine, the focused communications major with a minor in graphic design. My apartment near campus was shared with 2 other students who became my first real friends. Alicia, a computer science major, and Jasmine, studying business administration, didn't care about my appearance or family background. They valued me for my humor, intelligence, and loyalty. "You know what's amazing about you, Kat?" Jasmine said one night during our study session. "You're so resilient. I don't think I could have handled what you've been through and still be acing classes." These small affirmations from genuine friends began to rebuild what my family had systematically destroyed. With each semester, I grew more confident in my abilities and started to recognize my own worth beyond academic achievements. In my junior year, I landed an internship at a small marketing agency where I met Miranda Davidson, the creative director who would become my mentor. She was in her 40s, confident, stylish without being conventional, and immediately took an interest in my work. "You have an exceptional eye for design," she told me after reviewing my portfolio. "But you hide behind your work. I want to see you put yourself out there more." Under Miranda's guidance, I began to develop not just professional skills, but personal confidence. She encouraged me to speak up in client meetings, to present my ideas with conviction, and to take creative risks. "The way you arrange visual elements shows how your mind works," she observed. "You see connections others miss." "That's valuable, Catherine." When Miranda offered me a part-time position at the agency during my senior year, I finally felt I had found my professional path. The validation of being hired based purely on talent was transformative. Physically, I began to change too, though not in the ways my parents would have prescribed. Instead of crash diets and self-loathing, I discovered yoga through Alicia and found I enjoyed the meditative aspects as much as the physical benefits. I got my braces off and saw a dermatologist who helped me address my acne issues. I learned to dress for my body type rather than trying to hide it. These changes weren't about conforming to my parents' beauty standards, but about caring for myself. The irony wasn't lost on me that by focusing on my well-being rather than appearances, my appearance naturally improved. Dating was a challenging frontier. My first serious relationship during senior year ended when Marcus revealed he had been attracted to my transformation potential rather than me as a person. "You could be really hot if you just tried a little harder," he said during our breakup conversation. The comment was so reminiscent of my parents that I actually laughed out loud, shocking both of us. "I'm not a project," I told him, "and neither is anyone else you date." After graduation, Miranda offered me a full-time position at the agency. By then, I had developed a specialization in digital marketing for small businesses, combining my analytical skills with creative design. "You bring something unique to the table," Miranda told me during my performance review. "You understand what it's like to be overlooked, so you know how to make small businesses stand out." At 24, I made a decisive move that symbolized my independence. I legally changed my middle name from my mother's name, Elizabeth, to my grandmother Barbara's name. It was a small act of reclamation, honoring the one family member who had shown me unconditional love. By 26, I had saved enough to start my own boutique digital marketing agency, focusing on helping small, women-owned businesses establish their online presence. My understanding of being underestimated became my greatest professional asset. I named my company Visible Value Marketing with deliberate irony. My business grew quickly, as did my confidence. I developed a personal style that was professional but distinctive, embracing colors and patterns my mother would have deemed attention-seeking on someone with your figure. I cut my hair into a sleek bob that framed my face, a far cry from the long, limp style my mother had insisted was slimming. Through consistent therapy, I worked through the layers of self-doubt my parents had instilled in me. Dr. Morris, who took over when I moved away from Dr. Larson, helped me understand that my parents' treatment reflected their own insecurities rather than my worth. "People who base their value entirely on external validation are empty inside," she explained. "They tried to fill that emptiness by controlling you." I built a life that would have been unimaginable to the devastated 18-year-old I once was. I owned my condo, had a growing business, genuine friendships, and had even started dating Noah, a kind architectural engineer who valued substance over surface. The final piece of my transformation came when I was featured in a business magazine's 30 Under 30 list for my work with female entrepreneurs. The article included a professional photograph of me looking confident and accomplished. I sent a copy to Mrs. Larson, who had become like family to me, but didn't think about my biological family seeing it. I was building a life on my own terms, completely separate from the Wilsons. Or so I thought, until an unexpected email arrived in my inbox 10 years after graduation. The email from Emma arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning as I was reviewing client proposals. The subject line read simply, "Family situation. Please read." My finger hovered over the delete button, a reflexive protection against reopening old wounds. But curiosity won out, and I clicked. "Cat," it began, the nickname jarring after a decade of silence. "I know we haven't spoken in years, and you have every right to ignore this. But things have fallen apart here, and despite everything, you're still my sister. Dad's company is under investigation for fraud. The FBI seized files last month, and most of their assets have been frozen. The house is being foreclosed on next month. Mom's having some kind of breakdown, and Dad had a minor heart attack last week. I'm going through a divorce because Trevor couldn't handle the family scandal. I know how terribly they treated you. I know I wasn't much better. But I don't know who else to turn to. Can we talk? Emma? I stared at the screen, emotions colliding like storm fronts, vindication, concern, suspicion, and a strange sense of grief for the family I never truly had. My first instinct was to delete it and continue with my day. They had made their choice 10 years ago. But Emma's desperation felt genuine. After forwarding the email to Dr. Morris with a quick need to discuss this as soon as possible, I closed my laptop and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The city skyline usually calmed me, but today it offered no clarity. That evening, Dr. Morris and I had an emergency session. "What are you feeling right now, Catherine?" she asked after I'd explained the situation. "Confused," I admitted. "Part of me feels they deserve whatever's happening. Another part feels guilty for thinking that. And honestly, there's a small, pathetic part of me that still wants their approval." "That's not pathetic," she said gently. "It's human to want parental love, even when those parents have been harmful. The question is, what boundaries do you need if you choose to engage?" We spent the hour mapping out scenarios and boundaries. By the end, I had decided to respond to Emma, but cautiously. My reply was brief. "I can talk. Phone only for now. Thursday, 7 p.m. I added my number, but nothing else. No sympathy, no questions, no indications of my own life. Thursday evening came, and with it, a surreal conversation with the sister I hadn't spoken to in a decade. "You sound different," Emma said immediately. "It's been 10 years, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "What's happening with the family?" Emma's story poured out in a jumble of crisis and consequence. My father's investment firm had apparently been misrepresenting returns for years. When market changes exposed the discrepancies, investors filed complaints that triggered federal investigation. The country club membership had been revoked. Former friends were pretending not to know them. My mother had taken to her bed, emerging only to visit her plastic surgeon, charging procedures to credit cards that were nearly maxed out. "The worst part," Emma said, her voice breaking, "is realizing everything was a lie. The perfect family image, Dad's business success, even Mom's friendships. It was all smoke and mirrors." "When did you realize this?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Honestly, it started the day they threw you out," she admitted. "I was 16 and terrified they'd do the same to me if I gained weight or failed somehow. I became whatever they wanted, right down to marrying Trevor, because Dad said his family connections would be good for business." As she spoke, I felt a strange detachment, as if watching a movie about strangers. This family had occupied my nightmares for years, but in reality, they were just broken people whose façade had finally collapsed. "Why are you contacting me now, Emma? What do you want?" I finally asked. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. "We need help," she finally said. "Financial help, yes, but also, I don't know how to exist without the family image anymore. You're the only one who ever escaped it. You built something real. I thought maybe. You thought I'd rescue the people who threw me away?" I finished for her. "No," she whispered. "I thought maybe you could show me how to be real too." The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the perfect, polished Emma I remembered. "I need to think about this," I told her. "I can't make any promises." After hanging up, I sat on my balcony for hours, watching the city lights while processing the conversation. 10 years ago, I would have given anything for my family to need me, to recognize my value. Now, I wasn't sure I wanted any connection to them. But the next morning, I called my assistant and cleared my schedule for the following week. "Personal matter," I explained. "I need to go back to Connecticut." If you've ever faced the dilemma of helping someone who hurt you deeply, you know it's never a simple decision. Should I have just ignored Emma's email and continued my successful life? Or was I right to at least hear them out? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Now let's see what happened when I finally confronted my family after a decade of silence. The drive from New York City to Greenwich, Connecticut took less than 2 hours, but it felt like crossing decades. Each mile marker seemed to peel back layers of the confident, successful woman I'd become, exposing the insecure girl beneath. I'd booked a hotel rather than staying at the family home, a boundary doctor Morris had strongly encouraged. Remember, she'd said during our last session before my trip, you're not that powerless teenager anymore. You're visiting as an adult, making a choice, and you can leave any time. I repeated this mantra as I drove past familiar landmarks. The shopping center where my mother had once told a saleswoman not to bother bringing larger sizes for me. The high school where I'd been valedictorian to empty parental pride. The park where I'd sometimes hide just to escape the constant criticism at home. When I pulled up to the Wilson family home, the contrast to my memories was stark. The impeccably maintained property of my childhood looked neglected. The pristine white colonial had chipped paint, the manicured lawn was overgrown, and one of the garage doors hung partially open, revealing boxes and disarray inside. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage. Finally, I grabbed the manila folder containing financial and legal documents I'd prepared and approached the front door. Emma opened it before I could knock. At 25, my sister looked older than her years. The perfectly highlighted blonde hair was now pulled back in a messy ponytail, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a plain sweater. But most noticeable was the absence of the confident smile she'd always worn like armor. "You came," she said, a mixture of surprise and relief in her voice. I said I would. I kept my tone professional, fighting the urge to either hug her or turn and leave. She led me into the house, where the interior told the same story of decline. Spaces once filled with expensive art and designer furniture now had bare walls and visible gaps. The gleaming marble entryway had scuff marks and dust. "They're in the living room," Emma said quietly. "Mom's having a good day. Dad's been better since the hospital, but he tires easily." I nodded, steeling myself before following her through the house. Seeing my parents after 10 years was a shock. My father, once robust and commanding, seemed diminished in his armchair. His hair had gone completely gray, and his face bore new lines of stress and defeat. My mother, whose appearance had been her religion, looked almost unrecognizable. Her face was unnaturally tight from obvious cosmetic procedures, creating a discordant effect with her unkempt hair and worn clothing. "Catherine," my father said, struggling to rise before sinking back down. "You look successful. It wasn't you look beautiful or you look well. Even now," he framed me in terms of observable value. "Richard," my mother hissed, "you could at least say hello properly to your daughter." I almost laughed at the absurdity. After disowning me in 10 years of silence, she was concerned about greeting etiquette. "Hello," I said simply, taking a seat across from them without offering hugs or further pleasantries. "Emma explained your situation." "It's all a misunderstanding," my father began, a shadow of his former authoritative tone. "The SEC is making an example of me because of some investor complaints. The charges are excessive. Federal fraud investigations aren't typically based on misunderstandings," I replied evenly. "But that's not why I'm here." "No, you're here because despite everything, family helps family." My mother interjected, her voice brittle. "We always taught you the importance of family loyalty." The irony was so staggering that I had to take a deep breath before responding. "You taught me that family is conditional, but I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm here because Emma asked for my help." The awkward family dinner that followed was like a performance piece on denial. My parents acted as if my appearance after 10 years was completely normal, asking superficial questions about where I lived and what I did, but never acknowledging their role in my absence. My mother commented that I finally found a hairstyle that works with your face shape, as if offering a compliment. My father nodded approvingly when I mentioned my business, but asked if I had a man managing the financial side. I answered their questions with minimal details, observing how they flinched at any mention of my success. Their need to reframe my achievements as either luck or the result of their parenting was transparent. "We always knew you had potential academically," my mother said. serving boxed pasta that had replaced the gourmet meals of my childhood. That's why we pushed you so hard. Is that what you call it? Pushing? I kept my voice even, though my hands trembled slightly under the table. Parents have to be strict sometimes, my father replied, as if he'd merely enforced reasonable curfews rather than emotional abuse. Look how well you turned out. I turned out well despite how you treated me. Not because of it, I said quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table until Emma changed the subject to her pending divorce proceedings. After dinner, Emma and I cleaned up while our parents retreated to the living room, my father complaining of chest pain that required immediate rest. They're in complete denial, I murmured to Emma as we loaded the dishwasher. About everything. They've been like this since the investigation started, she replied. Living in an alternate reality where they're victims of circumstance rather than facing consequences for their actions. She hesitated, then added, It's actually helped me see more clearly how they treated you. I'm so sorry, Kat. I should have stood up for you. Her apology, 10 years too late but seemingly genuine, cracked something in my carefully maintained composure. You were a kid too, I admitted. They manipulated both of us, just in different ways. That night in my hotel room, I stared at the ceiling, processing the day's interactions. I'd expected to feel vindicated seeing my once powerful parents brought low, but instead felt a complicated mixture of emotions, pity, lingering anger, and a strange grief for the family we could have been. What struck me most was their complete inability to acknowledge reality. Not just their current legal and financial troubles, but the fundamental reality of how they had treated their own daughter. Even facing total ruin, they clung to the fictional narrative of their perfect family and parenting, just with a new chapter where they were being persecuted unfairly. I texted Noah, who had offered to fly out and support me. How did it go? He asked immediately. They're exactly the same, but with less money, I wrote back. It's like watching people drown while insisting they're just taking a leisurely swim. Are you okay? Came his reply. I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? The wounded teenager inside me was still hurt, but the woman I'd become recognized their behavior as pathology rather than truth. Yes, I finally responded. I think I actually am. The next morning, before returning to my parents' house, I met with Patricia Lawson, my father's former executive assistant, at a small cafe downtown. She had reached out after hearing I was in town, suggesting she had information I should know. I worked for your father for 15 years, Patricia said after we ordered coffee. I left 6 months before the investigation began. Not a coincidence. Patricia, a practical woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, had always been kind to me during my rare visits to my father's office as a teenager. I remembered her sneaking me candy and asking about my academic achievements when my father was too busy to acknowledge me. I started noticing discrepancies in the accounts 3 years ago, she continued, her voice low despite the cafe's ambient noise. Your father has been falsifying returns since the 2008 financial crisis. The company never really recovered, but instead of admitting losses to investors, he began operating something close to a Ponzi scheme. I listened, shocked, not by the fraud itself, but by its duration. My father's company was failing when I was still in high school, when they disowned me? Patricia nodded grimly. The image was everything. The house, the cars, the country club membership, all maintained while the company hemorrhaged money. Your mother's spending didn't help. Her spending? I prompted. Your father kept separate accounts for her cosmetic procedures. Hundreds of thousands over the years. Surgeries, injections, experimental treatments. She was addicted to procedures like some people are to gambling. And speaking of addiction, Patricia hesitated, then continued. Your father has had a prescription pain medication problem for years. Started with a back injury, escalated from there. Each revelation felt like peeling back layers of a rotten onion. The perfect Wilson family image had been maintained through fraud, addiction, and pathological denial. There's more, Patricia said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Financial records, emails, everything I documented before leaving. I'm cooperating with the investigation, but You should know what you're walking into if you're considering helping them. I thanked her, my mind reeling. Why are you doing this? I always thought how they treated you was shameful, she said simply. I have daughters too. After our meeting, I drove to the office of James Bennett, my father's former business partner, who had sold his stake in the company 5 years earlier. James had agreed to meet after I contacted him through LinkedIn, curious about my sudden appearance in town. The silver-haired man welcomed me into his modest office with obvious discomfort. I'm not sure how much I should say, given the ongoing investigation, he began. I'm not here about the investigation, I assured him. I'm trying to understand my family before making decisions about helping them. James relaxed slightly. I always liked you, Catherine. You were the sensible one. That graduation speech you gave was exceptional. You were at my graduation? I asked, surprised. In the back, he confirmed. I heard how your parents spoke to you afterward. It was illuminating. It's partly why I began disentangling from the business. Over the next hour, James filled in more gaps. He described my father's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain appearances as the business faltered, how he'd leveraged the house 3 times and used clients' investment funds to cover personal expenses. The country club membership alone was $90,000 a year, James said, shaking his head. And your mother's charity galas cost more than they raised. It was unsustainable. Did you know they used my college fund? I asked suddenly, remembering my father's email about transferring my remaining money to Emma. James looked genuinely shocked. Your college fund? No, that was supposedly in a separate trust. Are you sure? They told me they were using it for Emma's private university costs after I got scholarships. James's expression darkened. Catherine, Emma didn't go to private university. She did 2 semesters at community college before dropping out to model. Your father bragged about not needing to pay for her education. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Where had my money gone? And why lie about Emma's education? My final stop before returning to my parents' house was Emma herself. I texted asking to meet privately, and she suggested a park near our childhood home. When I arrived, Emma was sitting on a bench, looking smaller somehow than she had the day before. I sat beside her, both of us watching children play on the same playground equipment that had been there when we were kids. I need to ask you something, I began carefully. Dad told me years ago that my college fund money was transferred to your private university costs. James Bennett just told me you never attended private university. Emma's face crumpled. I'm so sorry, Kat. I only found out recently. They used your money for Mom's procedures and to cover country club dues during a cash flow problem. They used my college fund too, but told me it was lost in a bad investment. Why would they lie about you attending university? I pressed. Image, she said bitterly. In their social circle, having a daughter who dropped out of community college to model was embarrassing, so they invented a story about me attending Vassar. They even bought Vassar merchandise for when people visited. We sat in silence, absorbing the depth of deception that had shaped our family. There's more, Emma finally said, her voice barely audible. After you left, they told everyone you had a mental breakdown. That you were unstable and they were heartbroken, but had to distance themselves for their own safety and my protection. The cruelty of this lie stole my breath. People believed that? Some did. Others suspected it wasn't true, especially after your business success started making news. That's when they changed the story, said you'd gotten necessary help, and they were supporting you from afar. And you went along with this? I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. Emma's eyes filled with tears. At first, yes. I was terrified of ending up like you, thrown out, cut off. But last year, when Dad's legal troubles started and they turned on me after my weight gain during pregnancy, I finally understood what they did to you, what they do to anyone who threatens their image. We talked for hours in that park, Emma revealing the extent of our parents' manipulation and lies, how they had pitted us against each other deliberately, how they had used Emma's beauty as a commodity, pushing her into modeling to support their lifestyle while criticizing her intelligence, how they had begun criticizing her appearance too, after she gained weight following a miscarriage. When I filed for divorce, Dad actually said I was damaging the family brand. Emma said with a hollow laugh. Not concerned about my happiness, just how it would look. By the time we walked back to our cars, I had a fuller picture of the decade I'd missed, and the twisted, hollow core of the family that had rejected me. That evening, armed with documentation from Patricia, insights from James, and Emma's confessions, I prepared to confront my parents with the truth. The manila folder in my hands contained not just financial options, but evidence of their systematic deceptions. It was time to decide what kind of help, if any, I was willing to offer, and what accountability I would demand in return. Before meeting with my parents again, I spent the morning consulting with 3 people: my therapist, Dr. Morris via video call, my financial advisor Samantha, and Noah, who had flown in late the previous night to support me. You don't owe them anything, Dr. Morris reminded me. Any help you choose to offer should be based on what feels right to you, not obligation. Samantha reviewed the documents from Patricia and outlined options. You could certainly help them avoid complete financial ruin, she confirmed. But I recommend extremely clear boundaries and legal protections if you choose to do so. Noah's advice was simpler. Whatever you decide, I'm with you, he said, holding my hand as we walked through the hotel gardens. Just don't let them hurt you again. By afternoon, I had formulated a plan that honored my boundaries while acknowledging the complicated reality of family ties. With Noah waiting at the hotel for emotional support afterward, I drove to my parents' home for what I knew would be a difficult confrontation. Emma met me at the door, visibly nervous. They've been arguing all morning, she whispered. Dad's lawyer called with bad news about the case. In the living room, my parents sat like actors who had forgotten their lines, their usual script of superiority and control, no longer applicable to their circumstances. Catherine, my mother greeted me, attempting her former polished smile despite the obvious strain. We were just discussing options for downsizing. Actually, that's what I want to talk about, I said, placing my folder on the coffee table. I've consulted with financial and legal advisors about your situation. My father straightened in his chair, a flicker of his old authority returning. You've been investigating us? Without our permission? I've been gathering information to make an informed decision, I corrected him. Something I learned to do after being thrown out without warning or support. That's ancient history, my mother interjected with a dismissive wave. Families have disagreements. We're focused on the present crisis. The present crisis is directly connected to the past, I replied evenly. I know about the fraud, the misused funds, the prescription addiction, the cosmetic surgery addiction, and the lies about Emma's education and my mental health. I know you used both our college funds to maintain your lifestyle. The stunned silence that followed confirmed everything. My father recovered first, his face flushing with anger. Who have you been talking to? That's private family business. Private family business, I repeated. Interesting phrase from someone who publicly disowned their daughter. Emma moved to sit beside me, a gesture of solidarity that clearly surprised our parents. I've told Kat everything, she said quietly. No more lies. My mother's face contorted between rage and calculation, settling finally on a tearful appeal. We were under such pressure, she began. The expectations of our position, maintaining standards. Save it, I interrupted, surprising myself with my calmness. I'm not here for excuses or revisionist history. I'm here with a proposal. I opened the folder and laid out printed documents. I'm prepared to help you avoid complete financial ruin. I can provide funds to secure modest housing, basic living expenses, and partial legal representation. In exchange, there are conditions. My father leaned forward, eyes narrowed. What conditions? First, both of you enter appropriate treatment programs. Addiction counseling for dad, therapy for body dysmorphia for mom. Second, you make a full accounting of all family funds, including what happened to my college money. Third, you publicly retract the lies about my mental health. Fourth, you acknowledge, in writing, the emotional abuse and disownment. That's preposterous, my father sputtered. We are not abusers. You told your 18-year-old valedictorian daughter she was too ugly to be in family photos, then kicked her out for damaging your family image, I stated flatly. What would you call it? Parenting decisions you didn't like, my mother shot back. We did what we thought was best. Best for whom? I challenged. Best for your image? Your social standing? Certainly not best for your children, Emma spoke up. Mom, Dad, Catherine is offering to help despite everything. Most people would have slammed the door in our faces. My father stood abruptly, face flushed. We don't need charity with strings attached. Especially not from a daughter who abandoned the family when things got difficult. The absurdity of his statement might have been funny if it weren't so painful. I didn't abandon anyone. I was thrown away and erased, but I built a life anyway. A good life with real connections and success based on value I create, not appearances I maintain. So now you're using our temporary setback to feel superior, my mother accused, her voice rising. To punish us for not praising your every achievement. This isn't about punishment, I said firmly. It's about accountability and change. I'm willing to help, but not to enable the same patterns that destroyed our family in the first place. The tension in the room had become unbearable. My father was pacing now, his breathing labored. We will not be lectured by our own child about how to conduct ourselves, he declared. We're still your parents, regardless of past disagreements. Being biological parents doesn't entitle you to respect you never earned, I replied. My offer stands, with the conditions I outlined. Take some time to think about it. As I stood to leave, my father suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. He stumbled, knocking over a side table before collapsing onto the sofa. Richard! My mother screamed, rushing to his side. Emma was already calling 911 while I checked his pulse and breathing. Despite everything, instinct took over as I loosened his collar and helped position him comfortably. The ambulance arrived within minutes. As paramedics worked, one asked, "Who's coming with him?" "His wife and daughters," I answered automatically, surprising myself with the inclusion. At the hospital, we sat in grim silence in the waiting room. My mother alternated between tearful worry about my father and frantic concern about how they would pay the hospital bills. Emma held her hand awkwardly, while I maintained some distance, emotions in turmoil. The cardiologist eventually emerged, explaining that my father had experienced a stress-induced cardiac event, not a full heart attack. He was stable, but would need to remain overnight for observation. He's asking for Catherine, the doctor added, looking at me. My mother's expression hardened. After everything you said to upset him? He asked for me, I replied simply, standing to follow the doctor. My father looked diminished in the hospital bed, monitoring equipment beeping softly around him. When I entered, he turned toward me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. The doctor says I need to reduce stress, he said without preamble. Accountability isn't the same as stress, I replied, taking the chair beside his bed. It can actually reduce stress in the long term. He was quiet for a long moment. You've become formidable. It wasn't an apology or even a compliment exactly, but it was perhaps the first honest acknowledgement he'd ever given me. Your conditions, he said finally. Were they negotiable? The principles behind them aren't, I answered. The specifics might be. Another long silence. I never wanted to be like my father, he said finally, staring at the ceiling. He was a cruel man, physically abusive. I thought being different meant being softer. Not hitting, providing financially. It was the first time he'd ever mentioned his own father to me. There are many ways to be cruel, I said quietly. Yes, he agreed unexpectedly. I'm beginning to see that. It wasn't resolution or reconciliation. It wasn't even a clear acceptance of my terms. But it was the first crack in the wall of denial that had defined our family dynamic for as long as I could remember. When I returned to the waiting room, Emma looked at me questioningly. He's considering the conditions, I told her. It's a start. My mother refused to meet my eyes, her posture rigid with resentment. The family dynamic was shifting, and her position as image manager was losing power. Later that night, as I described the day's events to Noah in our hotel room, he asked the question I'd been asking myself all day. Do you think real reconciliation is even possible with them? I considered carefully before answering. I don't know. Real reconciliation would require them to fundamentally change how they see themselves and the world. That's rare at their age, especially after decades of denial. "So why offer help at all?" he asked gently. "Because I'm not them," I said simply. "I won't abandon family in crisis, even family that abandoned me. But I won't enable destruction either. The boundaries are for me as much as for them." As I fell asleep in Noah's arms that night, I realized that the decision I'd made wasn't really about my parents at all. It was about the person I had chosen to become despite them, someone who could extend compassion without sacrificing self-respect, someone who understood that true family was about mutual support rather than conditional acceptance. Whether my parents could accept those terms remained to be seen, but for the first time in my life, their acceptance no longer defined my worth. "Mom, the cake is melting." I smile at my 9-year-old daughter Barbara's urgent announcement as I adjust the decorations for my son Richard's 6th birthday party. The names we chose for our children raised Noah's eyebrows initially. Naming them after my grandmother and father seemed odd given my family history. But healing takes unexpected forms, and honoring the complex threads of my past while creating something new felt right. "The cake is fine, honey," I assure her, checking the chocolate masterpiece shaped like a dinosaur. "It's supposed to look a little prehistoric. Our backyard is transformed for the party, with streamers, balloons, and a dinosaur dig sandbox where kids will excavate fossil replicas." Noah emerges from the house carrying trays of snacks, winking at me as he passes. At 38, my life bears little resemblance to what I might have imagined during those dark days after graduation. My marketing agency has expanded to 3 cities, specializing in helping businesses with authentic branding rather than superficial image cultivation. Noah and I have been married for 9 years, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine acceptance. Our home is modest by my parents' former standards, but filled with warmth, laughter, and honest communication. Emma arrives early with her daughters, Sophia and Lily. After her divorce was finalized, my sister underwent her own transformation journey, returning to college to earn a degree in early childhood education. She now runs a successful preschool program, emphasizing emotional intelligence and self-worth. Our relationship has deepened into genuine sisterhood, hard-won through years of honest conversations and shared healing. "Need any help?" she asks, hugging me tightly. "Everything's under control," I assure her. "How's the new curriculum going?" As we catch up, I notice her glance toward the driveway. "They're running late," she says apologetically. "Dad had a therapy appointment this morning." The they in question are our parents, whose attendance at family gatherings remains a careful negotiation even now. The aftermath of my father's hospitalization 10 years ago marked the beginning of a long, complicated process. My parents initially rejected my conditions, attempting to leverage Emma's sympathies instead. But when their remaining assets were frozen and they faced eviction, reality finally penetrated their carefully constructed illusions. They accepted a modified version of my terms. I purchased a small condo for them to live in, held in trust rather than given outright, provided a modest monthly stipend, and helped with legal representation that eventually reduced my father's sentence from potential prison time to probation, community service, and restitution payments. In exchange, they entered treatment, my father for prescription addiction, and my mother for body dysmorphia. They also signed legal documents acknowledging the emotional abuse and disownment, though they insisted these remain private rather than public statements. Progress came in tiny increments. My father, facing legal humiliation and the collapse of his carefully constructed identity, actually adapted better than my mother. His therapy revealed generations of toxic masculinity and emotional suppression that, while not excusing his behavior, helped explain it. My mother struggled more, initially attending therapy sessions only to maintain financial support. The loss of her social status and beauty-based identity triggered a profound depression that required intensive treatment. Her recovery journey included several relapses into cosmetic procedure addiction before she began developing healthier coping mechanisms. Our relationship today is neither the false perfection they once demanded nor the complete estrangement that followed my disownment. Instead, it's a carefully maintained connection with clear boundaries, limited expectations, and occasional moments of genuine warmth. They arrive 40 minutes into the party, my father moving more slowly now at 73, my mother dressed simply compared to her former designer wardrobe. They bring presents and awkward smiles, still learning how to interact in a family based on authenticity rather than appearance. Catherine. My father greets me with a nod that contains more respect than the effusive false praise of my youth. You look well, my mother adds, which from her is significant progress, commenting on health rather than appearance. They are not perfect grandparents. They sometimes slip into old patterns of valuing looks over character. But they catch themselves more often now, making visible efforts to complement my children's kindness, creativity, and curiosity instead. The most profound change came 3 years ago, when my daughter Barbara asked innocently why she didn't see her grandparents as often as her friends saw theirs. Instead of manufacturing excuses, I explained in age-appropriate terms about different kinds of families and the importance of treating people with respect. My father, overhearing this, later told Barbara, "Sometimes grandparents make big mistakes. I made mistakes with your mommy when she was young. I'm trying to do better now." It wasn't the dramatic apology scene of movies, but it was perhaps more meaningful in its simplicity and honesty. The Scholarship Foundation for Emotional Resilience that I established 5 years ago represents another form of healing. Using a portion of my company's profits, we provide college funding for students from emotionally abusive homes. Each year, I speak at my old high school about recognizing toxic family dynamics and building self-worth beyond external validation. Last month, I encountered the Hendersons, former family friends from the country club, at a charity event. Their shock at seeing me as the keynote speaker was evident, as was their discomfort when I greeted them warmly. "We always wondered what happened to you," Mrs. Henderson said awkwardly. "Your parents weren't very clear." "Family dynamics can be complicated," I replied simply. "We're in a better place now." The birthday party unfolds with joyful chaos as children hunt dinosaur fossils and devour chocolate cake. I watch my parents tentatively engaging with their grandchildren, offering gentle guidance instead of criticism, asking questions instead of imposing expectations. After the guests leave, I visit my grandmother Barbara's grave, a private ritual I maintain on family celebration days. I bring fresh flowers and silent gratitude for the one family member who saw my worth from the beginning. "We're building something different," I tell her, touching the cool stone. "It's not perfect, but it's real." That evening, as Noah and I clean up the party aftermath, he wraps his arms around me from behind. "You good?" he asks, knowing the complex emotions family gatherings still evoke. "I am," I answer truthfully. Not because everything's resolved, but because I know who I am now. The journey from that devastating graduation day to this moment spans 20 years of pain, growth, boundary setting, and forgiveness. Not the easy kind that excuses abuse, but the complicated kind that acknowledges humanity without accepting harm. The most important lesson wasn't that family means unconditional support despite toxic behavior. Rather, it was learning that sometimes the family you create matters more than the one you're born into, and that true acceptance comes from valuing yourself first. As I look at the photos from today, my beautiful children, supportive husband, healing sister, and imperfectly improving parents all together, I see not the picture-perfect family my parents once demanded, but something far more valuable, an authentic family bound by growth, truth, and genuine love. If my story has resonated with you in any way, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear that family trauma doesn't define your worth or future. I'd truly appreciate your likes and comments about your own experiences with family expectations or reconciliation journeys. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories about breaking cycles of emotional abuse and building healthier relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey from rejection to resilience. Remember that sometimes the most beautiful transformations come from our deepest wounds.